All right, welcome everybody to episode 11. So we're gonna do guides today, and that is it. That's gonna be the subject. We're gonna try and concentrate on that and explain a couple of different things for guides and show one approach to doing it. So, and our rig, and I think I'm gonna publish this file maybe by the end of these or the end of the next episode or after a cleanup after this. It's not too far off from the last downloadable that I put out, so you can start from that easily. Or if the file comes up, keep an eye on the resource page on the website cultofreak.com, and you'll be good. Now, guides. So the thing that a lot of the time you need to do with a rig is basically place items around. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. So let's say that, and there's more, there's subtleties obviously, but let's say that you have two approaches, and one very common one, and they both have their merits for the record. I don't think there's, in this case, I don't think there's a superior or more obvious approach. One classic thing is, people do a guide of sorts, and then that goes through a build process, and then maybe you get some parameters that you can configure, so you have a minimal kind of configuration, and then once you're done, then that's your rig, and that goes out. And maybe once you have that rig, you also need to run a post build. Very often, if you do things this way, you will need to run a post build. So what do I mean with something like that? When you get that kind of situation, what will happen is that you have a script, and maybe the script generates something like this item, but will not generate all of these things which represent what the animator will eventually get, barring the sketch, which you don't. So you would have something like these items here for the leg global. You will get to move them around, then you run a script, and you get all of these items, maybe the foot done for you. Now, and that is fine. And then once you're done, maybe you have another post-build script. You still usually, once you've run that build, you'll still need to tweak something, because you've built the rig, maybe you run the skinning, and you figure out that there's a few things you want to tweak, like some parameters, and once you're done, you run some post-build that cleans it up, removes the guide, or whatever. And that is fine. That is a perfectly fine approach. Now, if you divide things by components, so let me just check, what is this stuff? Why is it here? Oh, because I restarted Maya. Yeah, I don't want you to do this, please. Once you, so let me get rid of the sketch. Do not want, thank you. There is one small problem with that in a way, which is if you are very component focused like we are here, and let's say that this part is most of what affects your foot. It has a strong effect on, and I'm talking about the guiding, so placing, the spacing and location of these things, and it will have some effect on your leg. And what else? It would not require anything, so this is a pretty easy one to do. So if we want to consider this a component in isolation, then what happens when you need to guide both the leg and the foot at the same time, because you want to configure these inside your rig? It gets kind of tricky, because now suddenly this process of guide, build, minimalistic config, rig, post build goes like, okay, if I run this for a component, and let's say that I run this process, what have I done here? Okay, Let's say that I run this process for my, what did we call it, the leg global. If, you know, in sequence, I also run the leg IK. So now you have an ordering problem. And maybe you compact everything into one giant script for your builds. And, you know, you have to do things in sequence. That's still okay. But then what connects these two and in what order? So very often when you run a system like that, you run something like your leg global guide, you generate the rig, then you run the leg IK guide, you generate the rig, and so on. And then at the end of all of these, you have to run, on top of doing that, you have to run some sort of connection stage. And then usually you need another post. And that might get you the entire rig. So, and that's, you know, still okay. Nothing wrong with it. And you could take a couple different approaches. Fine. Now, the part I don't like about this, and for the record, this works really well when you have a ton of builds that are very, very similar. This is actually how the Lego movies, the API we use for the Lego movies worked, and for other movies for that. The part that I don't like is that if you want something that is very generic, so if you're doing components like AV chain that could be used for both a leg and an arm, and that could behave differently depending on whether you connect in the clavicle, and it might need different parameters and so on, then it gets pretty complicated, and the interaction between all of those elements becomes a matter of trial and error, where you build and you find some issues, and you have to go all the way back and change some parameters and rebuild, and that's not terribly efficient. So when you're exploring, when you're building yourself a library, so we're talking of very important components that you intend to reuse a lot, when you're exploring, this doesn't really work out particularly well for me. You cannot ignore the fact, or you cannot easily or trivially ignore the fact that all of these components need to play with each other, and their interaction and the order of that interaction, because we're talking about avoiding cycles, becomes just too important to run something that is purely sequenced and doesn't really have a notion of ordering. So either you start adding ordering to the API, and you add another file somewhere that decides the order of build, and depending on the rig you have to reorder the build. Yeah, it can get more than a bit messy. So there's another approach, which is actually pretty tricky to do for some components, where instead of doing that, you find the configuration parameters for something like the leg global, your leg, your foot, and so on. And what you do is you actually build the rig, but that rig is fully configurable. So that might sound great. It's not for free. And it's sometimes very hard to do. And let me make it clear that it doesn't, I need to switch shortcuts in my head. It doesn't really exempt you for things like the post cleanup and so on. So the rig, while it's guidable, might be considerably slower, a little bit off. And let me explain what I mean, and then we'll start doing something about it. So if I make this guidable, and it's the first thing we'll do, as you change these parameters, so let's say that instead of having, where is it, a parameter here in what we're calling config parameters, for the tarsi length and the tibia length, what you build is essentially a meta rig where you place yourself a few controls. You lock out, one option, you can do it many ways. You lock out the manipulation of all these items. You place yourself a few controls, you look at the distance between those controls, and that will configure these parameters. It gets interesting fast. It lets you move things around. It gives you, you know, a rig for the riggers, basically. But it also means that now these things that are expected to be static and move on through the interface to other items might need to be taken over by a different set of controls, and that's where the post comes in. Even if you do something like this, you still usually need to reconnect a few things and so on. So you still need to tool up this process if you do it. So without further ado, let's actually do work. Do we have a guide? No. So let's start by doing what we did in the pilot season. And I added a group that I did not want or need to add. And what we do is we just give ourselves a host of sort here, where we're gonna put all of our guide elements. And let's see, I reckon we can easily do this part. And this will break a few things along the way, that's fine. We haven't started with guides in mind. The idea of this part is prototyping, so you will do something quickly to try and hand it to an animator on one test model. So guiding isn't really important at this stage. Get feedback, you know, find out what a good component is, make sure it's extensible, and so on. So for something like this, and this is another part where I like the approach of having clear boundaries to your components and a clear set of parameters, is figure out what you need to configure. So for something like this, if I were to guide a component like this, my expectation will be first to identify the things that we want to change. And in this case, we know we have a few items. So we have the ankle rest, which is hidden. No, it's just a transform. And we know that we need it to be at some default parameters. Already, you can tell that to find this procedurally, you would have to evaluate the foot roll twice. Once with default parameters, and once with the parameters that you're actually running. So when you're animating the foot roll like that. Whereas if you have a guide, it becomes easier to isolate those things. So you will run it twice, that's a given, but then it'll become a lot easier to get rid of default and it just gets baked in. Hopefully that makes enough sense in the abstract, and it will make more sense once we do it properly. So we say that these are config parameters. We could, to start, duplicate that, and where's my guide there? So that way we have quick access to the same parameters we've used. Now I'm gonna ignore the mandates of doing a graph that's non-reentrant and all of that and having clear boundaries. We just want to explain the guide. So we care about the femur length and the tarsi length for a guide? No, not really. That's the thing. That was to configure the rig. So already you can see a difference there. Because our intention is to be able to configure these parameters. So it's sort of happening just before the edge of the graph that we're configuring before. We do certainly care about things like tarsi rest and toe rest. Now those things in the config, or whatever we want to call it for the anim, has relatively little value as something that you can change the way we have it here. It has a lot more value as something that the guide can change dynamically, and then in your post gets pushed into the component. Whereas we do not have at all, as far as configuration goes, the position of these items. We only have the length, and we do all the grunt work to find the rest. So let's say that for the guide, we don't, for something like this, because it's front loaded, we don't really care about a base position of any kind. Let's say that we want the guide, and very much like when you rig something, you have to think of the controls for the animator. In this case, you have to think of like what is an intuitive way for riggers to control these. Let's say that we care about just the positions of these items, and we can do everything from there. And then you have to figure out whether you want an FK like something where, you know, if you put a control here and you rotate it, you rotate the following stuff, or whether we want an IK like behavior where you freely move objects in the world and stuff happens. And control guide, it's so hard to do this with just default transform icons. For the record, something like these, both in my system at home and at work, there's a lot of like very simple custom transform nodes that have their own icons. It makes finding your way around a lot easier. So we do care for that as a general control. And let's say that because we only have position, we don't care about doing more than circles, for now at least. And Okay, and rotate that, and we're gonna recycle that like crazy. So, okay, yeah, usual bug. You have to exit the tool, go back to the tool. All right, and we don't need much more than that. So chat, I am trusting you to let me know if something doesn't make sense. We don't need the make NURB circle. And we don't care much for the shape, so what am I doing? What am I doing here? It's one of those funny moments where you can't find your way around. Okay, there you go. So we want definitely these. For these, I will say if we had a child with just one translation unlocked, we're not going to support an angle foot plant. We will be good, and then for the rest we want free controls. So again, if you can do things on paper, like something like this, you only have 4 controls, you can intuit and and go from there. But if you get in the habit of sketching your stuff on paper first, eventually when things get more complex, you will have mature the ability to do it. So I say you want some sort of master object hierarchy wise, and I would expect that to be the heel. Then something for the length of the plant or the length of the foot overall. This is easier when you have pen and paper, so always have a notepad and pen. And let's say that this is length only, and it's okay, we do have that. And we're gonna do it with a lock position. We're not gonna allow for rotation because we only care for a translation there. And under that, so where do you want, and this is where you have to think in terms of, okay, when I move these for that configuration, do I want this stuff to follow, or do I want this stuff to stay in the same place? You can obviously play with that. I would say that I probably want those 2 items to be on par with that length, and we're gonna say that it's gonna be the toe position, and it's gonna be the toe start, and the ankle position, and these are gonna be translation only. So this is as simple, I mean, find your way to have notes. This is as simple as it needs to be for something like the foot, but it's not bad to have a plan. Putting things on paper will usually force you to think, to think of the problem a little bit more thoroughly. So, don't need to rename just yet, don't need to see shapes either. Let's say that I duplicate that and parent, and then duplicate that twice. So again, if you have something on paper like this, you know right away how many objects you actually need, and you know what to name them. So let's say that this is gonna be the heel, and this will be the tip. Come on. And this will be the toe start, and this is going to be the ankle. The parenting is as we want it. So this is where the hypergraph might actually come in handy, because you can see the hierarchy, and you can do this kind of free rearranging without suffering what is a list only view. What do I have here? This null. I will admit that I don't remember even creating that. Let's get rid of it. I maybe just broke the entire rig. I hope not. Again, chat, you are my sounding board. Let me know if this makes sense, or if it doesn't, or if we need to go over anything. So we do have these. Let us put these somewhere. Now the other thing, do I have snapping on? It feels like I have snapping on. Huh. Whatever, I'll figure it out. No, I don't. Just, do I? It's not telling me that I have grid snapping on, but it feels like I do. Oh, there you go. Now it's decided to appear. Anyway, cool. So the other thing is, you know, if you're doing a guide, find a good space, because if you're trying to guide something, like one of the things I really like about this actually is that you can have, and it's not easy. Again, this is not something where you go, oh, this is the way you do it, because it's better in every regard. No, it will take you time. It will add to the rigging time. So make sure that it's a component that you care about, like something that ends in your general library. Find stuff that makes sense to manipulate. So in this case, if I wanted to get these as a length, and orient things so that, sorry, I'm kind of going off tangents. The nice thing about this is that you can literally, if you have the right set of connections between the guides as well, and I have done that, so I know for a fact it's possible, you can literally build an entire rig inside the mesh and guide it, and you can even skin it. And then if you have the right connection, so if you have something that connects all your base deformers to the right matrices and so on, you can even decide to go in skin guide mode and move things around without the skinning to like taking effect, because you're changing both the bind matrix maybe as well as the actual transform at the same time. So you're giving the skinning a zero transform, and you can swim your guide inside the mesh, disable that skinning mode, and see if your joint positions are any better at that point. So you can get a ton of mileage out of these. Now, what I was saying is, if you do something like this, get yourself as close as possible, if there is a clear-cut winner, to the numbers you want. So in this case, I will want the length. If I do something like this, my tip is in a negative number. That's no good. Whereas I do not really care for these to have a rotation. It doesn't do me any damage. So, but I want to get a meaningful value out of that guide as soon as possible. Now for the ankle, you know, because this way, the more numbers are coherent, the more symmetry you have in your system, the better it's usually gonna be. Math almost always rewards some sort of symmetry. So we have the heel, we have the tip, we have the ankle, we have the toe start. Good enough. Now what we want to get from there is this length and the angle between these two joints, which is going to be, so we're guiding the rest here basically. And what do we want to get out of these guides? So let's, it's almost as if the guide needs its own input and output. So for now, we've decided that our input and output are at the component level, so don't hook into those. And we will want to, again, treat these as the manipulation rig for the riggers. So in this case, we only want to give control over the translate X, lock and hide the rest. You know, so this is, no matter what you do, like this is really easy to manipulate. We're saying that you can rotate things because it will toss your numbers around. You're giving this to a technical user base in theory, so lock what you don't need. Whereas these, you know, because everything that we're gonna that is gonna have value for us is gonna be relative to that. These maybe we don't want to unlock. We want to let people toss it around. So tip is locked to start an ankle. We're gonna say, look, the visibility we want to unlock, because that's everything. You can very quickly put a config, general config for the component to hide the guide and show the controls, or make the controls unselectable and show the guide, and vice versa, and you'll very, very quickly become a tool in the viewport basically. Lock and hide selected. So we got that. Now we can get ourselves a bit of a graph right away. For the tip, we can just get the x. Then we care for this length a good deal, so a distance between should be sufficient. If we had a proper vector length to be, and this is one of those configuration options, if you had put these under the tip, you would just get yourself, and if you went for FK, you could just get yourself lengths out of it. But what I want is actually different, because what I want is simple manipulation. So in this case, these are under the same parent, which means the distance between just the translate of those two items and nothing else will do me. Am I using the right ones? Toe start and tip, yes I am. And that will give me the toe length. I can do the same thing again for the ankle and the toe start, and that will give me my tarsi length. Distance between is unsigned, it's just always positive, so we don't need to care about what order. We can be a little bit retentive about positioning the graph in a convenient way, and that's it. Chat, give me a sign of life. Is this mind-blowing? Is this not doing it for you? Now, what happens? Let's see in what state the rig might be in. So if I change something like the tarsi rest, nothing happens. If I change the toe length, nothing happens. So we unhooked a lot of this stuff, which is not necessarily bad. We wanted to, like, we were in prototype mode. We didn't want to break the rig at every step. Now, another thing that we know we want is some rest angles that are gonna go out in the FK, and so the angle between these two, that is where you go like, okay, it might be that we want just the single angle and not the full rotation. So I am tempted to say that we need this one, which is going to be the subtraction of two vectors, and this one, which is going to be another subtraction between these two vectors, and get the angle between those two, and they'll give me my rest there. So we need two of these. Now, plus minus average. It's like I always struggle with this, because one is plus minus average, which is the signs plus an operation, and the other is multiply divide, which is the name of the operations. I don't know. I'm sure that the two completely different people that were implementing the same library, you know, they both thought that it would have been great to use their naming convention and not agree on one. Hint. It was not a great idea. So we're saying the tip, let's say that we go in this direction. So if we do the tip minus the toe start, we will know that we have the toe vector. So this is where ICE in XSI was so good, because you could just go and pick a connection, a port anywhere, and go like, hey, show me that, and you will get an error in there. Whereas these, I can do it because I've done this thing a million times, but yeah, without visualization, you kind of gotta hope that you're doing the right thing. So the other one will be the toe start minus the ankle. So get that again. And toe start minus the ankle should give us the tarsi vector. When you're doing this, I very, very strongly encourage you to name things right away, because you're going into some abstract realm where what is meaningful in these nodes is what you intend them to represent, not the operation that they perform. If you don't name them and you start having a few, you are going to be in for a terrible, terrible time. Now, output 3D, 1, And so now my expectation here, and we should be able to quickly verify, is that the Euler angle is where this is doing a little bit of magic, and it will give you rotation. So we said this before, but whoa, okay, that's a sensitive wheel. Where if you have, you know, two vectors like that, it will, and they're, you know, off some plane. So let's say that their coordinates are something like this, and this is 0 in the y. These might be the construction of these coordinates. You know, hopefully this is gonna make sense. This is actually gonna, the angle between rotation is gonna be doing its best to give you, hey, I'm gonna give you from these two, I'm gonna give you this angle so that you can do one plane, and then I'm gonna give you this angle so that you can do the other plane, and then I'm gonna give you the, you know, last what is it, the roll. I'm gonna give you this angle as well so that you can get like a roll this way, so that you can get the full thing. And the roll especially, like it has to do guesswork. Whereas the axis angle is gonna do a much simpler thing, where it's gonna do, you know, mathematically speaking, doesn't necessarily mean it does exactly that. It's gonna do the equivalent of getting a cross product between the two, which is a vector that's going to be pointing out that way. So if the two are completely overlapped, that's going to be 0. And then it's going to give you this angle between the two, which, if the way we've been using it in other places, we care for more than that, because we want it to work. You know, we can't work off an arbitrary plane. But in this case, because we know that these things are bound, completely bound to a plane, that is going to be fine, because we know that that plane is always valid. So on that note, I will say that to prevent further problems, we also don't really want to allow people to play with the Z on these controls. So let's lock away the Z as well. Now, this is not saying, hey, I don't trust the users, to not touch it, or to know, like, people won't know. If you guide for somebody else, very often people, same as software, people will not know the constraints or the assumptions that you were operating under. So locking something isn't telling somebody I don't trust you. I mean, it could be that as well, obviously. It's making it clear that you're not supporting that value. It's like, I can't deal with that level of complexity. This is supposed to give you a guide on a plane, which is just a couple of angles. So make that obvious and lock the things right away. Again, when you're doing guides, because you're so far away from the rig, you're gonna have a very long trickle effect on things. It's tough to debug if you get them really wrong. And if you get them subtly wrong, like you didn't expect a small value somewhere, like in that Z, again, you're going to be in for a very bad time. So this is where I will recommend that you're rigorous right away. So doing this gets us I think we called it the toe rest. Now, what else do we care about? We were running the leg, the global, the reverse foot roll, whatever the hell we're calling it. What direction were we running it in? This one. So the other thing we said we care about is the toe rest. Now this is pretty easy because we know we're working off that, and it means that we can literally look at this vector, our equivalent of that vector, which is going to be our toe start, being careful, you know, of what angles we look at and all of that. And we want the angle between this position and that. So this position here is relative to that. We are already finding it. So do we have an ankle minus toe? We do. And we say we're gonna do, sorry, not ankle minus toe, tip minus toe. We're doing the tip minus the toe. So, okay. Tip minus the toe. So we're going that way, which means we want the angle from minus x to that. And I've called that toe rest. Okay. that is actually what we call the tarsi rest before, I think. Chat, you didn't warn me. This is so in the abstract. It would be so much better if we had some visualization in there. I'm gonna need to add a couple of debuggy visualization objects very soon, because yeah, this is bound to end in pain if we're not very, very careful. So we say tip and toe is that. Come on. Sorry, I'm stupid. Tip and toe is that. And the other one that we want in this is, we say -1. So one of the options here, yeah, someone was saying it's, you have to create curves on the fly all the time if you want a visual representation. Yes, so there's a trick, which is a very, very simple one. One of the things Maya does well in many ways, if you create a curve, you get access to all of its points as positions. So you can very easily, instead of using these things like the joints for representation, you can very easily get moving lines. Now, that is something that I actually often do for guides, so that you get the connection between elements. There's a better suggestion of what is going on, so that if you invert these and that, you know, without looking at the names, you know what you're doing. The problem with that is that when you're looking at something like just a vector or just an angle, you go like, all right, what's up? How's, you know, how do I visualize that with just a curve? So you have to do a bunch of constructs where you get the points of a curve and cosine and stuff like that to orient them. It's pretty painful. Or you can write yourself some OpenGL diagnostics, which aren't super hard to do. Cesar, a colleague of mine, Cesar Saez, put something together to visualize. It's in Python, and I forget the name right now, but you can find it, I'm sure, to visualize items in Maya. Something like that can come in handy if you can't write your way out of this mess. Now let's move on with that, and let us, and this is the part where components are your friend again. So this is our foot roll part. Can we guide it right away? I'd be inclined to say yes. Now, we've been lazy in a way with the prototyping side of things, which means, you know, now we have to do a little bit of work to figure out what we're driving from where. I'm undecided, given the amount of time we have, whether I should do a quick diagnostic or whether I should try and hook into the leg global. Let's hide that. Let's also save. So this is my guide. That's okay. So that's my leg global. That's the leg component. And that is the foot. The sketch we probably could delete, but let's not be hasty. Let's try. Let's be adventurous and let's guide these things. So someone was saying MUIDrawManager is good for that kind of stuff. I don't know if we have link posting disabled in chat. If someone, like if one of the moderators has the time to look it up and put a link in chat, so you can let us know if it's there. I might link it in the video description. But yeah, if you can find a way to visualize things, do it, because like you're going in the abstract here. You're rigging a rig, and it's important that as you're experimenting and not doing something that you've done a million times, it's important that you get some view of what you're doing. So we're gonna be adventurous and we're gonna configure the actual rig. So the tarsi length we're actually using, the femur length we don't need to care for. So, and this is where I was saying, look, it's, you know, the config is here and it's in the anim and it's going out to this thing. So if I start driving these items, with the guide, then I'll need to rerun those reconnections. So the post build becomes necessary. The alternative you have to that is that you drive your config from the guide. So in that case, super quick parentheses, I guess, tangent, whatever. We say that, you know, our components, as far as their interface goes, are shaped like, you know, we have the input here and we have the output here, and as you know, as part of that input you might have, you know, the anim controls, and you might have the guide. If you do something like that, so they're peers, which means if you're looking at an edge, you're not supposed to do that. You're breaking edge, which is you're crossing an edge. It's not good. Now that is not a hard rule. Like, it's, you know, your system is a matter of conventions, and all of the system handling the same conventions. It is perfectly acceptable to say, look, the IO is completely bound, you cannot mess with it, but as far as the spaces of the rest, I am okay, you know, with the guide being an inner edge. So it can receive from the input, obviously can't cross back. And with the control side of things being an inner edge again, which means it can be controlled by the guide and it can be controlled by the input, in example. And then you sort of save yourself some trouble. Obviously, you know, you kind of got to be careful about a number of things, but it's not a bad design for the record. In fact, these days, I've usually implemented the adder with a flatter interface for a number of reasons. But if I was to do a more naive system without all the layers built on top of the adders I've worked on, I will probably make some of the edges softer and tier like that. So we want, for sure, the toe vector distance between, okay, there you go. Talking about naming things right away. So this is tip and toe. So this is gonna be the toe length. I was positive I had renamed that. Clearly I didn't. And this is gonna be the tarsi length. So let's get these out of the way for a moment, and let's see what we can do. So toe length, if we do that, and tarsi length, if those still have an effect. So let me have a look. Let's make sure that it is having an effect. That's, you know, step number one of debugging / checking for stuff. Make sure you have an effect. Okay, so this stuff is working. When you move these, you can see, you know, you might not see the numbers, but you can see that the toe and tarsi are changing, and they're changing the way we expect them to. So what is probably happening is that in our prototyping frenzy, we unhooked those items. So it is not a bad idea. If you're really solid, if you have faith in your components and how you put them together, it is not a bad idea to break them and then put them back together by trying to do the design of the guide. You got to be stepping very carefully, but it's not a bad idea to try and do these on an existing component. It will usually also prod at the component a bit and show you eventual weaknesses early on enough. So what is puzzling me is these not moving when that parameter is changing, and I'm wondering if it's, I must be coming, oh no, I must be doing the wrong thing here and driving the wrong config, clearly. Yeah, there you go. Yes, they are. So in this case, it's just silliness. This config is something that I want to drive those, if need be. It was more of an annotation. So toe length, and tarsi length. So that's just a user error. Now that way, sorry, what is going on here? Have I've selected the wrong thing, man. So you can see that obviously, you know, it has a limited effect because we're not changing the angle yet, but we're not in too bad of a shape. Now, the next thing we need to figure out is the toe rest. Does it still have an effect? Probably not, I'm tempted to say, but let's have a look. So because we went for the SDK approach, it means that we're probably not adding, or that we're getting stuff from another place. So we're getting the roll, pushing it through this curve. Well, this is the unit conversion, pushing it through, oh, come on, pushing it through this curve. And then we're straight up going out to the tarsi SRT. Okay, that's that. I want the toe, please. Which is largely the same thing. So because this is, I'm sorry, because this is an FK setup, what are we going out with? We're using these to do all the work for us. So to make this configurable, which we want even if we don't guide, because you want those as parameters, what we have done, I would guess, is basically baked the offset. So these will be what we had as this thing is offset by the rest of that toe. Oh man, graph editor. So yeah, you can see that if you lower that, and this should maybe ring a bell, like from what we're seeing about functions, and if you look at the, you know, the boundaries of that function, figuring out values, it's like developing that kind of intuition is gonna do you a solid. So if we take these and we subtract whatever that offset is, which should be just 0, and it should be the same on both ends, then now this is flat, but the rest of our stuff should still work just fine. So we want to reintroduce that, and we actually do want that usually to be live, especially if we did this with, you know, more than a set driven key. And all we should need is we did find that we can use the blend node additive. I think I did find, I don't remember anybody telling me, but if somebody did, thank you. I think I was just playing with this, going like, in the additive mode I would expect it to do this. Also, this thing where it doesn't show me some of the ports, like, it always drives me somewhat insane. Sure, I'll do show all attributes. By the way, if you use a Wacom pen, like on Windows, the drivers are terrible and the marquee menus are gonna give you a lot of grief. So we did have a very reasonable thing here, and we're saying that we're using these as a soft edge. So if we put that in additive mode, and let's see, are we mistaken, or are we gonna be rocking these? Oh, there you go. So that's going better. Now, so time-wise, for the record, sorry, very sorry about that, but like, obviously, you know, you gotta talk about everything you're doing, you gotta explain the rationale. These things are gonna take an inordinate amount of time. I would expect, if I had some visualization tools, even simple enough, I would expect the guide for something like this to literally tell me take me maybe 10 minutes, 20 with the cleanup. For something very complex, it can take a few hours. Something very complex, otherwise something like a tail. If you start having guides that can create and destroy objects to add to the population of a component and so on, that will require callbacks and transients and stuff like that. That can get very expensive. So it can take you, you know, if it takes you, I don't know, 5 days to do a super spine that is gonna take your, you know, your company to the next level, guiding that might take you just as much time. But it will pay off in the long run if it's the super spine that your place is gonna use for the rest of, you know, until the end of time. Now, The angle between that we care about, we say is toe rest, and we are using that. Hopefully we've not been idiots. Well, me in this case, because you guys will not be responsible. And okay, that's not bad. We are gonna need to figure out, you know, the right operations, but we're getting somewhere. So that angle between, it's probably going in the 180 or something like that. What are we getting? 167. So maybe I actually did want just the +1. There you go. Duplicate the config group. So that is always positive. We don't support, we're against negativity, you know, you got to be positive. So again, we might want to clamp this. I'm gonna take my own advice, and I am right away gonna, what am I doing here? And I am gonna limit, I'm saying, look, you can't do this. We don't support negative Y. You can, sure, you can have completely flat toes, but you can't go negative. It might not be reasonable, but I mean, there's only so much time to do this. In that case, do suggest it in your interface. So let's limit the minimum Y. There you go. Would I use limits? This is something that somebody asked. Would I use limits in an actual rig? It depends, especially how they interact with the controls, and if you limit a control and something can break the limit, or you do other things, like be careful of their effect. But consider them purely a manipulation thing. Don't rely on them to actually properly give you boundaries to something that is, you know, in a formula. But yes, I will use them. For manipulation, they work really well. There's nothing wrong with them. Now, we're doing all right. I thought it would have been worse, which I just jinxed everything. So let me save. Now, the same thing we did here. So we're saying that this is now an important part of a rig. Sorry. And this is what I was saying. It's like, it will poke at your rig. It will show you where you cheapened out, or where you were rushing something through because of the prototyping phase, and it will force you to clean it up. So roll, toe. Let's go for something. So this will be the toe roll, actually, with the offset. And we're only interested in the angle, so we'll name like that. Our naming convention right now is a little bit all over the place, but as I was cleaning it off stream or renaming stuff, I did not have problems finding my way around, so it might not be terrible. And the other one we want to deal with is this one, and we want exactly the same setup, so I would expect to be okay. I did have a disable on the add-on creation, so that's fair game. Now the other one I want, switch to the mouse, show all attributes, because input B is cool, but input A, oh no man, input A is sacred. It shouldn't really matter actually, but which you go to with what. And we were originally connecting there, so let's go for that. Chat, give me a sign of live and let me know if we're going astray or if this is still making sense, if it's even interesting. So we cool with that. Now that's obviously offset our stuff, which is good. I mean, obviously we don't want that random thing, but Tarsi rest. No, don't do it. God knows what happens when you put an input into an output. Man, we've been doing a lot of nodeling this season, but what can you do? That's the nature of rigging some days. So TarCF curve, we want to modify that. We add an offset. Does anybody know if there's a syntax for expressions? Because the classic -20 equal -20 equal plus -20 whatever doesn't ever seem to do it for me. But I can do this in here. So I want 0. No edit. No. Clicking it is, sure, I don't mind. So I'm subtracting the 20 to get back to our original. Minus equal 20 should work. I'll try it next time. Cause, yeah, it wasn't the other day, but I might have. Yeah, so somebody was saying minus equal 20 should work, and somebody else was saying equal plus or equal minus. Equal plus or equal minus or equal, you know, equal plus minus 20 always worked in the past. It wasn't the other day. I need to check better, to be honest. So I'm not going to put it on Maya just yet. Now, this is the Tarsi role. So we just renamed that. We're going to stick to our idea of being disciplined as well as saving very often, because this is boring and tedious work and I don't want to do it twice. Now, we did have the other angle somewhere already, did we? So this is the toe rest. No, I don't think I did the Tarsi rest. Huh. Does anybody remember if I did the Tarsi rest? I thought I did. I clearly didn't. Anyway, so what do we got now? Okay, that's good. These should have no real effect just yet other than the length. So you can see it affecting our AK actually. Now whether we pass those values through, I don't think we do, so we might need to do some work there. But anyway, angle between. Let's do that again. Minus equal 20 just worked on my machine. So yeah, the minus equal might be the trick there. Again, I'm not gonna put that on Maya. That is almost guaranteed to me. I very rarely use those things. So toe rest. We want these to become. This is a terrible name. We'll need to change it. No, it's not terrible, but it's too generic. We might eventually get a clash from that. Tarsi rest. See, this is. That's why I was saying that. I thought I had that. So what I got for Tarsi here? Tarsi rest. There you go. Is it hidden under something else? Is that happening? There you go. Alright, fair enough. I need a big honking arrow that tells me, hey, it's under this when you select it. And okay. So we say we're going to use the angle and go into the Tarsi rest. So there you go. There are some things we might want to look at. So if you go in the wrong direction, I guess, if you exceed that, you know, you're in trouble. So we got to deal with something like that. We got to deal with the sign of that angle. And now I'm wondering, actually, if in that case, since we now limited a bunch of things, so I would expect it to be on the Z. Can we rely on a little bit of that magic? Like it's going to be inverted here, but it's possible we could. So these are fixed and so we can't really negate one of those, but is it going to be no. We say there's no, we need a blend. Blend DA should have blend node additive DA. It's, what happened there? I might just have clicked my way. Okay. And see, I wish this worked, but no. That would be too useful. So the trick that, again, I think somebody suggested it. It might have been Brad, it might have been somebody else. If you It's pretty dirty, but again, it's less dirty than other options, and we say that we're gonna use just Maya nodes. If you take something like this, it's normally, you know, give you an additive or a multiply. Now, I don't know if the multiply will do us right away. Nah, because it won't, yeah. And that makes sense, because these being angles, multiplication is actually a funky thing with angles, and this is supposed to be a blend. That's okay. So what we want is a -1 here, which should negate the sign of what we have as an input, because that's a multiplication that makes sense even in angles. And Darcy rest. So is that gonna sign our angle? Yes. There you go. It's not too bad. We have some offset that we need to look at, but it might just be icon-ish issues, or maybe this decided. Well, anyway, we're off by something. We're off by oh, okay. I'm not driving the plant length yet. So femur length, plantar length, tibia length. That's the problem. So we need to deal with that. This is not too bad. How far are we into it? So we're about 1 hour into it, I guess, from when I started the stream. I reckon we wrap these up. If you guys have questions, please ask them, because I kind of like where we got to, and I think that getting this guy done, and then, you know, in the future, in the very near future, having a look at how it interacts with the leg and finishing the whole foot leg loop with Guidable in place, it will be a good place to be, and we might get there in, you know, couple other streams. So for the time being, save all the time in panic, and let's get us plant length. Should be all in. Am I on the right? Yes, I am on the right selection. Now, again, we are doing something that is going to be hidden from the animators at this point. So bind whichever way is reasonable. Now, as I said many times before, this is, you know, I'm streaming, so I'm in a bit of a rush. I'm using the default interface. I strongly suggest you use soft min and soft max. So a hard minimum here is a hard minimum. We don't want to go negative. There's no negative length. But the maximum, I will not hard bind like this. I will just use a soft max, to be honest. For now, you know, this will do it. Let's go for something like that. And so, what is next? Let us get the plant length. I think we already have something, and we should be able to literally just use the tip X. Now, this is not going to be connected to anything inside our foot roll. My neck was completely locked. So, okay, let's go there. This is, we're probably using a negative here. Yeah, we are. So we'll need to, because we did this to be fairly, like we didn't want to rotate these by 180, basically, which we did in the guide. And that's perfectly okay. So again, that's why I was saying, you know, sometimes you will need a post pass. You can think of it like the way you think of an optimizer in a compiler. Once you're debugging and guiding and setting stuff is done, the optimizer's job is to find anything that can be a constant and make it an actual constant and stuff like that. And it's, if you're tidy and if you have, you know, this is why I was saying, if you have clear specs and contracts in your interface, you can write that kind of script very easily. So without further ado, yet again, we want to negate that. So mult double linear -1. See, these will show me both inputs. This is a good boy of a node. I like mult double linear. Simple, it does one thing and it will show me both inputs. Thank you. That's all I ask of you. Now, can we please get the other nodes to be just as disciplined and good boy as this one? So translate X, this should get me a negative, and that should be it. Yes. So let's show the leg again. It might have, because with these parameters were having an effect on the leg as well, and we're not transmitting all of them. We were rigorous with that, you know, prototyping stage and all. It might or might not be a disaster right now in there, but who knows? Like the foot might not be following the same stuff. Though it does seem like it does. The channel box is for animators, Ryan. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone, Ryan was saying, my only complaint with the mode double linear is that the inputs are invisible in the channel box by default. You're rigging TD, man. Use the attribute editor so that you can only edit one thing at a time. So, all right, what do you know? We actually were more diligent than I thought we were. So there you go. That's as simple, and this is admittedly front-loaded. It's a simple component. But if you look at all these controls are still as zero as they should be, because we're driving the buffers, we were diligent in that, and you guide the thing while it's, you know, wherever it needs to be. That's all a guide component. Well, I'm saying that's all, but it can be hella tricky at times. But that's what I don't know what to call it. Let's a dynamic guide, an active guide. I don't know. I don't want a moniker for this thing. That is what it would do for you if you configure it correctly. So I like this. I like where we got, and I like how we got there. And you know, might need to rename these. We're on a good boy streak. Let's be a good boy to the node. Or a good girl, if you're a girl rigging, in this case. Not for me. So is node feminine or masculine? That's the other question. Or gender fluid. Leg global, plant length negated. Sure, let's go for negated. It'll be fine for now. So, yep. For now, I'm gonna say that this is my day because it seems like a good place to stop. We guided, you know, a pretty significant, tiny, but pretty significant part of our rig. Yeah, I'll take it. Chat. This is the end of the line for today, unless there is something that you want to know. It doesn't need to be strictly about guides, don't worry. It's got to be somewhat rigging related, though. So streaming is about 20 seconds delayed. I'm gonna give it a minute. Go. Fair enough. Based on my kids, most nodes are boys. They get overexcited and don't do as they're told. Yeah, we'll see, because I have a daughter. I don't have a boy. And I suspect they don't do as they're told either. I'm not sure it's the girl-boy thing there as much as the kids thing. Alright. No questions. We're going in 5, 4... Alright, we're good. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how interesting is this? Should we do another couple components and get ourselves a completely guidable rig? Put it to the vote. So if you're watching this on YouTube, nothing is happening from here on. I'm just listening to chat. I probably should have stopped recording before asking that. But hey, actually no. You know what? If you're still watching this on YouTube, put it in the comments. Go ahead. Like, I don't get enough comments. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, hey, I want everybody that watches it to comment and say, oh, thank you. This is amazing. It's nice to get those comments, but I am... Like, if you're watching this on YouTube, I am very interested in knowing what you guys want to see more of or less of. It's it's a stream so that it can be fluid. You know, there's not really a strict curriculum. We say we start with nothing and we end up with a ball and legs rig, and there's a few things that I want to do that I didn't do for the simpler rig the previous season, but that's all the parameters. The rest we'll figure out as we go based on what people want to watch and see. So everybody in chat on the stream is saying yes, which means that yeah, we'll probably do more guides. The IK1 is actually a pretty interesting guide to do. It's fairly easy, but it's one of those things where if you have a solver that you have put together and you see how simple it is, it's really easy to guide one. When you don't, it can get a lot trickier, because when you're dealing with factory nodes and you're connecting around stuff that is in the scene state and then you import that as a model, not everything always goes well. All right, let's call it. Thanks everybody for watching. Particularly thank you for all of those that still attend the stream. It will be an absolute drudge to do these without you. And wow, it's bright. And I'll see you in the next stream. Sorry for the lack of green screen, but it's a public holiday here and it is a chill stream.